All right, well, thank you all for being present here today, and I'll cut straight to the chase. We have two studies entitled, both done by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Number one is a pictorial account and landscape evolution of the crevasses near Fort St. Philip, Louisiana. That was done in January of 2014. And we have another study, USA's Perspective on Mississippi River Sediment Diversions. This was authored by Brigadier General Duke DeLuca, January 2014 as well. And I guess if you don't mind, Colonel, I hate to put you on the spot, but do you have any reason to believe that these studies are good, or are they still good, or are they no longer good, valid?
I think they're valid. So if I could, I'll just explain to everybody where we're at, try to address some of your questions and concerns. So as the Corps of Engineers, we are the lead federal agency for this permit application from CPRA to build the sediment. The permit application was submitted in June of 16, got put on the federal dashboard, Fast 41 trip process, Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, aka Fast 41. Right? So through the Fast 41 process, come up with a schedule. It's on the federal dashboard. You want to go look at it, permits.performance.gov. We update that schedule every quarter. We just updated it on the 1st of July for this quarter, fourth quarter. As got several federal regulatory agencies in here, and the Corps is the lead, but really we're all in this together for partnership, particularly through the Fast 41 process. We're going to produce one environmental impact statement addressing every federal agency in here as the lead for a different set of laws, different set of concerns. One EIS will address all those. Current schedule, so the original schedule, once the state applied for the permit, I think was November 2022, right? You heard that 5-year timeline. We have pushed through the Fast 41 process, and through the President's guidance, President Trump signed an executive order, 13807, saying all federal EISs should happen in 2 years. Basically, it's not a mandate, but we're strongly encouraged as the federal government to push all environmental impact statements, regulatory reviews nationwide as fast as possible. Part of the President's plan to jumpstart the economy, etc. So the current schedule, we're pushing it as quick as we can. The current schedule is to have the permit decision by November of 2020. Not quite 2 years, not quite 2 years, a little bit more than 2 years from when the state applied for it. It's a living schedule, right? It could go faster than that if we get everything we need together. It could take much longer than that if we don't get everything we need. CPRA, they know this. We're news to them, but they have a lot of requirements to give to us: the design, the operating procedures, the modeling, etc. So there are lots of concerns that are going to be evaluated through the environmental impact statement process. So the Corps of Engineers and as the federal government, we're neither for nor against the diversion. We can argue diversion's merits or damages or odd damages, all we want. EIS will evaluate all those. Also, the diversion is not approved. It's not approved until the final record of decision. Like I said, currently scheduled to be signed November 2020. So, talked to the parish president a couple times, as late as this morning, as late as 5 minutes ago. Encourage all of you to participate in the EIS process. You can participate, fishermen and non-governmental agencies in there. Send me letters with your concerns or comments. And we had scoping meetings down here. We had scoping meetings. Any input we get from local governments, private citizens, non-governmental organizations will have to be addressed in the environmental impact statement. Really addressed by the project applicant, in this case CPRA. They want to build this. We all know why they want to build this. We also all know that there are potential damages that the diversion will cause. So send us all your stuff. So President, you've got all those studies that point to damages or lack of effectiveness, if you will, for diversions. I would say every diversion is different. So Fort St. Philip Crevasse has been detrimental in that area. Doesn't necessarily mean that the Mid-Barataria or Mid-Brant sediment diversion will have the same effect. It might, and that's what we're looking at. So that's all the stuff. This one's going to be specifically designed for a specific purpose. And that's what all the modeling and all that stuff gets into. This EIS is specifically looking at the sediment diversion in the vicinity of Myrtle Grove and Ironton. That's what the state has applied for. From the wider state coastal master plan and the wider trustee implementation group plan for restoring all the damages to BP, there are other things, other projects, dredging, and what this EIS is specific to the sediment diversion as alternatives. In the EIS is going to look at different sizes of diversion or no diversion as the alternatives. It's not looking at the full gamut of coastal restoration alternatives that everyone's familiar with. So I think that's sort of where we're at. I'm happy to be here today and thank all my federal brothers and sisters for coming down and joining us today. Some of you traveled far as DC to be here. So the parish has frankly been silent on the EIS process to date. We sent you letters, we provided you stuff. It's not too late to jump on the team. The president asked me this morning if we can establish a special task force to look at the diversion. We already have that yet. Several members of that task force are in this room. It's called the EIS scheme of the federal government. Every federal agency you can think of has been invited to participate, from the federal environmental agencies, several represented in this room, Coast Guard, you name it, Department of Transportation. Everybody, every federal agency has a different lane that they are focused on. So we want to get everybody in this to evaluate this. It's going to be, if approved and if built as the state intends, it's going to have impacts. It's going to have impacts to the navigation channel, to the levee, to the railroad, to Highway 23, to the wetlands, to Barataria Bay itself, right? We know that, and that's what the whole EIS process is about. It's to get everybody's concerned. Each one of you guys has a different perspective, different, so you live through your whole lives. We want to get as much info as we can included in the environmental impact statement. Flip those concerns and questions. You know, the President and Mr. Crabtree have exchanged a couple letters in the last month. The President's got some great questions. I don't think many of them have answers just yet. Those are all answers that CPRA and their engineers and the modelers all are working on getting those answers to basically prove to the federal government that the impacts are going to be no impacts, or any impacts identified will be properly mitigated before the federal government approves it. It's kind of where we're at in the big picture. Look it back to you, President.
Thank you, Colonel Clancy.
Or let me just stop there. Any other federal, Chris, you got anything, any other federal partners, everything they'd like to add to what I just said from our perspective? Okay.
So to the best of your knowledge, though, these core studies are still good science and valid.
Yeah, I think so.
And you don't know of anything, any refutation of these studies from a scientific standpoint?
No, not that I'm aware of. They're saying counter studies, saying they are,
Okay. And the Corps has been doing this. Would you agree with me that the Corps has the most experience in dealing with the Mississippi River and its effects and managing the river from the MR&T decades-long experience?
The Mississippi River Commission and Corps of Engineers, that we are the federal agency that manages the Mississippi River. So I think that's a fair statement.
Would you agree or disagree that the Corps should receive a certain amount of deference when it comes to its studies?
I don't know that our science is any better than anyone else's science. We've done more. I don't think anybody's done more analysis of the Mississippi River in the last 200 years than the Corps of Engineers. Plenty of other good scientists in government and in academia that, scientists can argue models, scientific analysis of the river. I don't know that the Corps is always right, or the Corps' answers are any better than yours. We have more experience and a lot more analysis that we've done, but I would say the core always is right. If there's two scientific papers disagreeing on the river, we'd have to take those on the merits of each paper.
Now, one of the studies in the USACE perspective on Mississippi River sediment diversions done by Brigadier General DeLuca, it referenced another final report to the state of Louisiana and U.S. Army Corps. It was entitled Mississippi River Freshwater Diversions in Southern Louisiana, Effects on Wetland Vegetation, Soils, and Elevation, position paper by the technical panel from the Workshop on Responsive Louisiana Marsh Soils and Vegetation to Diversions. This was coordinated by the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, published December 5th, 2012. In that study, they had more questions, and I'll read exactly what it says here. One of the quotes was, "A general conclusion on the expected short-term and long-term responses of marsh below ground production to freshwater diversions in Louisiana could not be drawn from the available evidence." With regard to, another quote was, "With regard to freshwater diversions, data are particularly needed on how changes in water chemistry or plant community composition may influence plant production, decomposition processes, and resultant effects on soil volume and elevation change." I have today, what I'll be passing out, is a recent study that answers some of those questions. I don't know if everyone passed one that way. This study is entitled research paper, Suspended Sediment Concentrations and Loads in the Lower Mississippi and Atchafalaya Rivers Decreased by half between 1980 and 2015. It also found that the sediment load in the lower Mississippi was even less than that of the Atchafalaya. Which does the Corps, do you have access in the EIS process, do you have access to the CPRA models?
Yes.
Okay. I would simply request that, officially request that the Corps study which sediment, and you have to forgive me, I'm not a scientist. If you don't mind at this point, we do have, we're lucky to have a retired NOAA scientist and also worked for NASA for a while, Mr. Ken Savastano. And at this point, I might have him come up and he can do a better job of articulating some of the questions about the models. The gist of it is, which is, what exactly are the assumptions of CPRA's models? Are they using the Atchafalaya Basin model of sediment? And we certainly want this recent updated empirical data included because we feel, or we believe, that the models of CPRA are using, not using the best available science, as they quoted in their 2017 State Master Plan.
I guess this current article indicates that the suspended sediment concentrations have decreased from 260 milligrams per liter to 130 milligrams per liter. And also the suspended sediment loads have decreased. Indicates a 50% decrease in concentrations. I guess one of the questions in the models that the CPRA used, what concentrations did they use in milligrams per liter in computing the number of acres they're going to produce? I think in this 29,000 roughly in the 2017 master plan, and that was running at so many days. If you keep the number of days constant and you whatever they use for the concentrations, if it was higher than 130 milligrams per liter, then we should produce less acreage. If If we produce less acreage, then the cost per acre by diversions is going to be significantly less or more than the cost per dredging. So we need to evaluate that. We're being told that dredging is more expensive than acreage created by diversions. I think we need to, we don't know what estimate they use for price per acre for dredging. We'd like to know that. And we'd like, if indeed they use the concentration greater than 130 milligrams, we'd like to recompute the number of acres and recompute the cost for an acre based on dredging, and then comparing to see if it's still cost effective to build the acreage via diversions. The other thing the paper indicated, number one, so that needs to be looked at. The other thing the paper indicated, again, in the Chafalaya, the concentrations are increased as the flow rates increase, low, moderate, and high flow rates. But in the lower Mississippi, the concentrations with flow rates are comparable for low and medium, but when you get to the higher flow rates, they actually decrease in concentrations. And that's the time frame from January to July, which is pretty much the spring time frame. And that's exactly when we want to start operating the diversion at Myrtle Grove to try to get the highest concentrations of silt. Well, it seems like pretty much of a contradiction to me if we're going to operate them in the spring when the concentrations in the lower Mississippi decrease. So what is the justification for, we need to relook at what's the proper time to operate those things in the operation plan. So we'd like to see you look at that too. Again, did the models use concentrations out the Chafalaya, which are higher than the lower Mississippi? Based on this paper, it indicates that the concentrations were probably in the neighborhood of 260 milligrams per liter. The current ones that's been in existence before this paper was in the neighborhood of 260 milligrams per liter, and that was taken from upstream in the Mississippi, not from the lower stream. The other thing it indicated in the paper was that the concentrations in the Chafalaya are higher because there seemed to be a silt source in the Chafalaya that the flow rates suspends that silt source in the water, and you don't have that. They're trying to explain why the concentration in the lower Mississippi is less than the Chafalaya, which indicates that possibly we do not have that same silt concentration in the stream bed in the lower Mississippi, and that's why we're getting decreases of concentration, suspended concentration at higher rates, because there's nothing in the stream, the stream source itself to add to the concentrations. And that's basically, if we can get some answers on what concentrations were used in the model to compute the acreage, that needs to be looked at. And then we need to look at, do we have to, if we're going to keep the acreage the same in 50 years, the only way we're going to do that is if we increase the number of days we're going to flow water to the estuary. And if we're going to increase the number of days we're going to flow water to the estuary, we're going to increase damages to the estuary. So let's assume we're going to keep the number of days constant that was used to project 29,000 acres. And if we do that and the concentrations are lower than what was used, then we're going to produce a lot less acres. So that needs to all be looked at. I would like to see, personally, I'd like to see what was the milligrams per liter concentration used in the models that they used to compute the 29,000 acres. We don't have that. The other thing I would like to see is what were the estimates for per acre cost from dredging, which is variable depending on where you're doing the dredging. What was used for this particular comparison? What was the numbers, dollars per acre? What was the numbers per dollar acre for diversions? How was it computed? What was considered? I have some reservations in those numbers. I don't think how they were computed, everything was evaluated properly. In fact, we have something like a $400 million seafood industry in Barataria Bay every year, a yearly seafood income. That's a renewable resource. So we got that for 50 years, assuming it's going to be stable. If we're going to use a diversion, we're actually going to affect the seafood. So we're going to run that price way down. So again, if we take 50 years times the 400 million, diversions are going to impact that renewable resource. Therefore, if we're going to lose that, that value needs to be added to the cost of diversions. If we're going to dredge, and this is not supposed to be covered in this meeting, but if we're going to dredge and we're going to look at the cost of dredging, if we're not going to destroy that resource, then that resource is going to be there for 50 years, and therefore it should be subtracted from the cost of dredging. Then we need to compare the cost of an acre versus a cost of diversions. That's why I want to know what were the calculations used, what were the functions used in computing these acreage costs. Then we can start comparing cost of which one is more cost effective, because that's what we're kind of selling the diversions on, being cost effective in the long run. Okay. The other thing that I would like to see is basically all the negative impacts that we have with negative diversions that you're going to be seeing with concerns. We don't see that with dredging. Heavy metals going into the estuary, pollution with Escherichia coli, which kills, that stops the oyster reefs continuously down here when the pollution from the river water gets out to that. We get that if we're going to put that in the estuary. We're going to actually run, these things are essential fishery habitats, both Britain Sound estuary and the Barataria estuary. They're both essential fishery habitat for shrimp. You can go to National Marine Fisheries. That's settled by the Magnuson-Stevenson Act. They both have the Marine Mammal Act, which protects the marine mammals, and which we have particular pods of dolphin that's unique to both estuaries. We have invasive species that comes in from the river, like water hyacinth, which stops navigation on anything out in the marsh to get to canals, to use it for fisheries. We have invasive species like Asian carp, which will take over the environment for the natural species, which we already have coming in from some of the diversions and the crevasses. I could go on the negative impacts. You do not have that with dredging. It's localized, it's fast, and you don't destroy the salinity regime with dredging. You put very little water out, you don't destroy the salinity regime, and therefore you don't have the impact, the negative impacts with fisheries and so forth. The other thing you have with high volumes of water, disregard sediment being in the water, but let's say when you put this diversion out, you're going to have high volumes of fresh water. At 75,000, you're going to run the salinity down to drain out to zero extremely fast. You're talking about 86.4 million gallons for 24 hours. 86.4 billion gallons for 24 hours. That's not going to take very long to run it to 0 parsec at Grand Isle. All the oysters immediately dead. Clams dead. That's gone immediately. All your marine resources, that's pushed out if they get a chance to get pushed out. If they get trapped, they're dead. The other thing I forgot to tell you is we got fertilizer coming down the river from the farmers that grow corn for ethanol. We got an 8,000 square mile dead zone periodically, from 6,000 to 8,000 in the Gulf of Mexico. That same fertilizer that's in the river, when we put it in the Barataria Bay and Britain Sound Bay, what you think it's going to cause. Algae blooms, algae's going to die, goes to the bottom, decays, use up the oxygen, dead zones. We already have them in Britain Sound. You can go to Lake Pontchartrain Foundation, coast things that come out every 2 weeks. We'll see the dead zones over off of Britain Island. We'll see fish kills off of Britain Island. We were told at one time that's not going to happen because it's the waters in the estuaries are not stratified. They're shallow and not stratified like the Gulf of Mexico. So it won't form dead zone. Fallacy. Dead zones will form in the shallow waters. So we need to keep that fertilizer water out. That comes in, when do we get the fertilizer? At the high rivers, when January through July, the spring time frames, we put in the fertilizer into estuaries. So we're gonna cause dead zones. Even if we don't affect the marine fisheries, even with freshwater fisheries, we're gonna cause dead zones. We don't want that. Last and probably the most significant impact, there are scientific studies that indicate when you run salinity down to zero, brackish marsh requires 5 to 15 parts salinity. Salt marsh requires 16 plus parts salinity. You run that down to zero, you're going to kill the brackish and kill the salt. We already see that in Britain Sound. Carnarvon ran it down to zero, and we've killed significant parts of Britain Sound. 42 square miles, in fact, were converted from brackish to intermediate marsh, and then Katrina just washed it out. We lost 42 square miles with Katrina. That was fresh marsh. The reason, there's a scientific paper by Howes, if you go dig that out, if you want, we have copies. The physics behind that particular thing is very simple. Fresh marsh has shallow root systems. The soil strength of fresh marsh is weaker than the storm stress. Okay? Therefore, it's washed out. Brackish marsh and salt marsh have soil strengths, deep root systems and soil strengths which exceed storm stress. And that's in Howell's paper. And in fact, he shows the exact Pascal units for those stresses and soil strengths. The fresh marsh is washed out. That's what happened over there. We lost 42 square miles. It's converted to intermediate marsh with shallow root systems. Katrina came along. The stress from Katrina exceeded the soil strength and washed out 42 square miles of it. What are we going to do in Barataria Bay? We're going to put fresh water in. We're going to run the salinities down to what? Zero? Kill the brackish and salt marsh that's there? Yes, we'll have some sediment lost while washed from the storm, but some of it will still be there. We're going to put sediment in, which is positive. We all want the sediment. We're going to put it in. What's going to grow on that sediment? With zero salinities, fresh marsh. What happens when we're in the storm environment here? We're not above Baton Rouge where the storm, salt water, and the storm is not going to affect it. We're in a storm environment. Salt water will kill the fresh marsh immediately because they can't handle it. I was indicated it was like 3 parts will kill fresh marsh. So salt water will kill it. Even if the salt water doesn't kill it, the storm stress is going to exceed the soil strength of that fresh marsh. It's going to wash out. We're going to have zero marsh from Grand Isle all the way up to Belchers. What's going to happen to our storm surge? With no marsh to knock it down. We're going to increase storm surge. We're going to increase flooding. So, do we want to do that? We're being told that we're going to build marsh out there. We're going to connect the river to the marshes. We're going to build it. We're going to build marsh, and by building marsh, we're going to have marsh out there to knock down storm surge and decrease flooding. That's what we have been told by this diversion people. Just the opposite. We're going to put sediment out there. We're going to kill the brackish and salt, which is resilient in the storm environment. We're going to grow fresh marsh, which is not. It's going to be destroyed, open water, increased storm surge, increased flooding. So we have all nothing but negative. We're putting high volumes of water in these brackish estuarine environments, estuaries. Why do we want to do it? Because it's cost effective per acre, and we're going to nourish the marsh. We got another paper that's out of Massachusetts. high volumes of nutrients into a salt marsh, allows the marsh not to have to put down deep root systems to get the nourishment. It forms shallow root system and actually kills the salt, the brackish marsh and salt marsh. So renewing, putting nutrients in that to nourish the marsh, not a good idea either. What is the good idea that we're going to get out of this thing? I can only see one good idea. The $6 billion that's dedicated for two things, from the damage to restore. It's dedicated to barrier islands and diversions, and it can't be spent on anything else. So if we can't spend it on anything else, maybe we should spend this thing on diversions. Regardless of what it's going to do to the constituents of Plaquemines Parish, the parish, all the people that depend on it for its living, our marsh, our increasing our flooding, and everything else. Why are we going this way? We are told that the best signs indicate that diversions are the way to go. Yet we don't see any signs. All we're being told is we need to connect the river to the marshes. That's the way the delta was built. This river is not the same river that built this delta. This river's got significant other problems. Do we want to connect it? Will you eat the catfish out of the Mississippi River? Absolutely not. You can eat them out of the estuaries. They don't have the pollution. Would you put the river water on your garden in your backyard? It's got Escherichia coli in it. Again, we just had what? Lettuce from Arizona that has Escherichia coli that impacted and killed a lot of people. Or it's made a lot of people sick. Escherichia coli in hamburgers kill people if it's not cooked properly. Why do we want to put all of this in our estuaries? We got some pretty beautiful estuaries out there. Why do we want to destroy them? Is it worth going through all the negative things? We have alternate dredging. Let's see if it's more costly for dredging or less costly when we consider all the factors that go into the cost for it. That's all I've got to say. You have any questions from anybody?
Sorry, Steve,
Anybody else?
Do you have any signs that indicates what I've told you is invalid? I've asked that question to the Department of Natural Resources and the CPRA numerous times. I've asked them to, can you answer me how you're going to run the salinities down to zero, not kill the fresh and the brackish and salt marsh and produce fresh marsh that's going to increase our flooding? No answers. I need some answers, folks. I'm only told we're doing this because the best signs tell us. I see no signs. Give me the signs. Where's the meat, like the lady with the hamburger says? Where's the meat, folks? That's all I have to say. Anybody has any objections or anything to counter my signs? I even presented this at Carnarvon meeting. You know what I was told? That's kin science. That's not science. Scientific papers I represented, those guys don't know what they're talking about. That's what we're facing down here, folks. And I don't have any problem. I've offered them to go and have meetings with CPRA scientists. Let's sit down and discuss this. Nothing. We want to discuss the signs? Give me some signs. I don't have any signs. I'm giving comments. We're going to decrease storm surge, we're going to decrease flooding, and we're going to connect the river to the marshes, and we're going to build a wetland. That's verbiage. That's not science. Give me the signs of how you're going to do it. Give me the signs how you're going to stop the negative impacts. How you're going to prevent the destruction that you're going to. We got a 20-year experiment on a freshwater diversion. Doesn't have sediment in it, but destruction didn't come from sediment. Lack of sediment. Destruction came from high volumes of water. And right now, we're still getting that damage. I put a request in as of yesterday to stop 500 cubic feet that's going in there, which this thing was designed to enhance oysters and run the predators away, the oyster drills. It started to run it for building land. The Corps has told them repeatedly in monthly meetings and yearly meetings, it wasn't designed to build land.
insisted that they were gonna build land. They finally got off of that and said it's not building land, but it's providing nutrients. Well, we got papers that said you don't wanna provide nutrients because you allow shallow root systems, which the storm, in a storm environment, you destroy. So that's negative. Then just recently we're told, since we converted all that marsh from brackish to intermediate marsh, we had 3 parts salinity in Great Lake Leary in December. They said we had 3 parts salinity. So we want to knock that down because it's going to kill the fresh marsh. We don't want fresh marsh. We want brackish and salt marsh. We want the salinity restored to 5 to 15 parts in the upper region, 15 to 25 in the lower region. What it originally was, it was a brackish saltwater estuary. It's now a freshwater estuary. We want it restored. It can be restored. The essential fishery habitat can be restored very rapidly if you restore the salinities. You can kill the fresh marsh, and what you'll get is the brackish and the salt marsh back growing where it's supposed to be. When we get that growing back, then we have storm surge protection because the storm will not wash it out. It has deep root systems. So what are we doing? We're pouring more fresh water over in there. We're doing exactly opposite what the science is telling us to do. And what I'm being told when I provide this information to them, I'm being told that's Kim's science. That's not our science. Yet I don't get their science. So I've got a problem. And we all should have that problem here because it's taxpayers' money. And there's taxpayer money of $1.4 billion going into the state that could be put into dredging and produce the proper vegetation to knock down storm surge and knock down flooding and protect the levees that the Corps is currently building, because when you run it at 75,000, you're going to have water against your levees. In addition to that, when you have water from that diversion in there that's going to raise the tide, and when you get a storm, it's going to come above the tides, which means you're going to have additional water on that levee. So it's going to negate the amount of water on that levee. And I'm going through way too much information for you guys to absorb at one time. But it's so damn simple. Sorry about my language. But, you know, even to the guy with the white boots, the shrimp guys, they see what's going on. And why can't our super scientists at the state and federal level understand? In fact, we have people at the federal level that understand. We have a responsible national marine fisheries that on the Weird Diversion expressing their concerns. And if you look at those concerns, they mirror the concerns that I just said. Because those guys, I'm from fisheries, okay? And I know how it affects fisheries, but I also dug into what it affects the marsh. And I don't see that kind of science being used in this project. So please, if you're going to evaluate that, I put my concerns in on the essential, on the environmental impact statement. National Marine Fisheries put theirs in. Other organizations put it in. We have real concerns. If CPRA couldn't answer my concerns about the salinity in the marsh, that's in their back statement. Get them to answer that. We don't have an answer. I guarantee you, this is simple biology. You don't have an answer. When you run the salinity to zero, you're going to kill the brackish salt marsh. You're going to kill a thing that's the only thing that's resilient in the storm environment. We're not above Baton Rouge where we're not in a storm environment. We are in a storm environment on both sides of this river. So we better be concerned about what we do and what we grow that is resilient. End of conversation.
Colonel, with the EIS team, what sort of involvement, if any, does the Commerce Department and Health and Human Services and such have that's involved in the impact? Because one of the things that I'm most concerned about is the economic impact that the diversion will ultimately have upon the fisheries. And just the simple ability to live and work on the southern end of the parish once it comes into effect. I think it'll have an impact on the LAMP process, which will only exacerbate the cost of insurance. I think the evacuation timetables are going to be altered. That's also going to create some problems, especially during the summer. Right now, It's 72 hours out. We gotta start. We can pull the trigger if we're gonna evacuate people or not. Otherwise, our folks are, behind everybody in Jefferson Parish and New Orleans trying to get out of here. Well, if we have to back that up, that means almost anything in the Gulf of Mexico that could potentially become a storm all of a sudden becomes a real danger to our people. And the only responsible thing is to pull the trigger. So if you don't do that, you run the risk of having people get trapped. And if you do that, you cut off all commerce, you cut off all life. So essentially during hurricane season, it would be almost impossible to live on the southern end of the parish. And so, and then another thing is the salinity line. I think we all agree, everybody science agrees that the salinity line is going to go out. The further you push the salinity line, the more economically difficult it is for small, not very wealthy fishermen to go and chase the shrimp. So what you're essentially doing is creating an anti-competitive environment where only big business is going to be able to go and get the shrimp. And then the small-time fisher people who make their livelihood this way, who are integral to the culture, they're going to be displaced. And they're either going to have to be retrained, or there's going to be psychological and social issues there. I mean, are we going to have some sort of mitigation, for mental health? We're going to have mitigation for retraining. We're going to have mitigation. I mean, how do you even mitigate for the destruction of a way of life? I mean, to me, that's, in many ways, we're looking at one of the biggest regulatory take-ins that's maybe ever happened in the history of the Republic. So I'm worried about the economics, and I don't see a lot of thinking on in terms of what we're going to do to take care of the people. Because I grew up down there. These are my people, and I'm very concerned about it. Anyway, I would just hope that I think we need a little bit more economic, focus on the cost benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Landry. If I may, Colonel, I'd like to adopt and reiterate and include National Marine Fisheries concerns in their letters that were sent to the Corps. Adopt those as Plaquemines' objections and comments regarding essential fish, ESF, essential fish habitat, and regarding the Magnuson-Stevens Act. Also, I'd like to object to the exclusion of dredging as an alternative for this project. And the reason is this. There is over $18 billion of dredging projects proposed for the rest of this state. And Plaquemines is being disparately treated, or we're being targeted. And now, as I just handed out, the best available science clearly states that the proper place to experiment with the diversion would be the Atchafalaya Basin, not Plaquemines Parish. Now, I know that might, that doesn't benefit the economic interest of people, say, around Fouchon, but if we're claiming best available science, well, here it is, and it indicates that if an experimental project diversion would so desired to attempt, it should be done on the Atchafalaya, not on the lower Mississippi region. And so to the extent that best available science is not being used, and to the extent that Plaquemines is being disparately treated, not being treated differently than the rest of the coastal parishes in the state, well, we'd like to object on the record. Also, to the extent that the CPRA models do not include vegetative analysis and do not include storm surge, hurricane surge analysis, we'd like to object to the use of those models as being flawed, inherently flawed. We are a coastal parish. We're clearly susceptible to that, and I think the title of the article by Howells that Mr. Savastano cited was Hurricane-Induced Failure of Low Salinity Weapons. peer-reviewed National Academy of Science published paper. Also, to the extent that the CPRA model does not include a socioeconomic analysis, as Mr. Landry cited, we want to object to the use of these models. That's not how one can tout a model without including those aspects, without those aspects being included, or in this case being excluded. Simply, it's not good science.
Before we go any further, let me ask a question. I hear you objecting over there. This is not an official meeting where, I don't know if anyone's keeping minutes or not, but is it your intention to put those concerns and objections into the EIS process so where they can be validated as objections, or when we leave here a meeting where we heard some objections but not being any follow-up since the government is not on record in the EIS process to date on any of these things? So,
Councilman Russo, one, this meeting's being recorded.
right, but
Two, we will be memorializing some of these objections. Three, the Corps has been CC'd in our correspondence previously with Chairman Bradbury.
So my question to the Corps, are these comments going to be included in some official document because you had a meeting here, or do they need to be?
They are not, no. You need to submit everything you said.
That's the point I'm trying to
You said
get
if
to.
you haven't said it to us, everything you're saying, I already told for the department, yeah, this meeting's great, happy to hear this, we've heard all this before, but you need to formally submit it to us to be cool.
So the point I'm making is that because they have a camera videotaping this, doesn't include in the EIS process unless you memorialize it and submit it, correct?
Yes.
On item number 6, Colonel, just in order to direct sediment distribution from the proposed experimental diversion, it requires, would it not require maintained channels? I think I did see one Corps study where it said that sediment tends to build up nearest to the outlet. And the question there is does the proposed plan have provision for the construction and maintenance of those channels and sub-channels? And also, wouldn't those sub-channels, would they get a pass on the permitting process, or do those have to be permitted as well? It's something to consider. We just, another thought that we've, question that we have. And Colonel, if I may, this agenda, I'd like to submit it as a written document of some of our questions and concerns in part of the purpose of the EIS process. Number 7 is pretty much self-explanatory. And it would I'll tie that in with our objection regarding the fact that Plaquemines is being treated distinctly from other parishes. We're being told that the cost of dredging exceeds the cost of the diversion, but yet in every other part of the state, CPRA is proposing dredging. So how can they explain, that would be one of our objections, how can they explain that the cost of dredging in the Mississippi exceeds that of the cost of dredging everywhere else? Moreover, with the WRDA bill and with the talk of federal government deepening the Mississippi River Channel, and I guess I could phrase this as a comment or objection to their cost analysis. If we worked with the federal government, if CPRA worked with the federal government, and we set up siphons, or culverts along the channel, such as every 10 to 15 miles, I think the cost of dredging could actually go down if we collaborated with the Corps and just simply paid for the cost of hauling the dredge material from the channel into those culverts or pipeline diversions, as was done successfully by CPRA with the Bayou DuPont project. How would that, I mean, would that be permissible, Colonel, to collaborate with the Corps in the proposed dredging of the Mississippi River channel down to 50 feet, which would give us, I don't know how many, probably billions of cubic yards of material that would give us potential use, as beneficial use. Would that be, is there any legal impediment to that, there being collaboration there?
No, not at all. So we are always looking for partners. Parish is a partner with the LCA BudMat program, always looking for partners for the BudMat program. CPRA, the state was interested in partnering with us to move some of that sedimentary dredge. Just brought it up and give everybody an update on the 50-foot channel. So that we have a plan to currently maintain the river from Baton Rouge to the Gulf to 45 feet. We proposed and studied taking it to 50 feet. Final draft plan went out. Public comment in the Federal Register that closed just last week, and we anticipate that we will. Final step is Headquarters Corps of Engineers approving that, and we expect in late 19, early 2020, we will get to work, beginning at the Gulf and working north to maintain the river to 50 feet. Now, the vast majority of the river doesn't need dredging. It's deeper than 50 feet already, but it's the basically Venice south, a little bit around Port of New Orleans, and then the crossings between New Orleans and Baton Rouge will all need to be dredged. So that will be a little bit more material we dredge every year, particularly in the head of passes area. We beneficially use about 93% in the last 25 years. About 93% of everything we've dredged from Venice to the Gulf is put on land. The land, you guys know this, it's your parish. The land down there in the head of passes is growing because of all the bug mat. Don't do much dredging in the section between New Orleans to Venice. It's naturally deep enough. We don't have to dredge where the diversion's going. So, but yeah, as an idea to partner with the Corps for dredging and beneficial use, we're always interested in partnering. And we thank the parish for your partnering Tiger Pass 1 and trying to get Tiger Pass 2 off the ground.
And thank you for your collaboration with that. And I don't know if you could fold that into a comment or objection as far as that would also affect, lower the cost of dredging. And again, I certainly see no reason why, and certainly object to the exclusion by CPRA of dredging as an alternative in this EIS process. And suppose the preferred first course of action, or is it the preferred alternative aspect? Finally, regarding liability, and it's, I've reviewed the BP case documents, and in those documents, the criminal defendant, BP, in a, I believe it was court order, gave themselves a hold harmless clause for their, and they did put the, or they put strings on the money in support of citing diversions. Of course, the term diversion is not a defined term in the court document, which certainly allows for an expansive reading. But the hold harmless clause for the fines and penalties from the BP case, which would be a financing source, a proposed financing source of these diversions, states that BP gave itself, or was given, hold harmless clause for any effects from these diversion projects. It moreover states that the administrator of a certain portion of these BP funds, in that I think it was a probationary order agreement, got to select the administrator of those funds, namely NIFWIT. And NIFWIT was also given a hold harmless clause for these diversion projects, which begs the question, if this is such a good idea, why did the source of funding obtain? And certainly, and I'll see to representative from USDA here, but in my experience, most criminal cases, a hold harmless clause is not given to a criminal defendant, in my experience. So one, it begs the question that if this project is not going to cause harm, why was a harmless clause, hold harmless clause included? And if this project were to proceed, that's another we have an objection to the financier being given a hold harmless clause. If everyone under Louisiana law and under general common law principles, if you do an action and you're involved in putting conditions on a certain action, then if negative consequences follow from that action, liability flows. And so we object to their hold harmless clause in this process. And I'll be following up, because we just, it's upon information and belief, but I'll be following up with correspondence to Chairman Bradbury. Upon information and belief, one of the board members of CPRA is also a member of NIFWIT. And to that extent, there's a conflict of interest problem. And we'll be following up with correspondence there. I don't know if you're the proper party for that, but I am not. Yeah. So, if in conclusion, if we could, I'm not going to give you copies of your own studies. We simply would like to make these studies part of the EIS process, introduce them into evidence for the purpose of the EIS. We'd like to introduce into evidence the agenda from today, and we'll provide also a copy of the video of this meeting, also for the EIS process. And as well, we'd like to introduce into the EIS process the position paper that was cited by Brigadier General DeLuca, and also the research paper by U.S. Geological Survey, suspended sediment concentration of loads in the lower Mississippi and Chapelizod rivers decreased by half between 1980 and 2015. We could all have those officially made part of the record of the EIS process as our objections / comments and concerns.
Yeah, Colonel, what is the time frame and opening window for him to prepare all of this and get it to you? Because as I understand from the discussion a little while ago, this is not part of...
Councilman Russo, excuse me, but that's not on the agenda today. If you would have contacted me beforehand, I could have put that on the agenda, but I think we're taking up the Colonel's time.
I understand this is your agenda, but it's also our agenda. And everything that I've heard here, this is a relevant question. You talk about objecting and putting things in the record and all of this stuff. I'm just trying to find out, when does the record open for it to be put in, and who's going to put it in, since you haven't put anything in the record to date. Now, you know, I don't want to get into a discussion that goes nowhere. I'm trying to be proactive and find out exactly when is the next opportunity for you to put all of these objections and all of these documents and studies into that record, rather than the Colonel leaving here. And Colonel, as I understood it, when you leave here, I mean, all of this has to be memorialized or submitted in some process. I mean, you're not going to go back to your office and say, okay, Mark, put this in the record and put this in the record. Is that correct?
Right, yeah, like I said, President and I discussed this morning, him sending all this to me formally with the letter. So
Well, that's my question.
The
Thank you
sooner
for
the
answering.
better, right? This train is moving. EIS is being worked on and being written. Brad, what's the timeline? What's the draft current?
Under the current schedule, the draft EIS is scheduled for the end of November 2019, And as you articulated, the schedule can change both.
So that's the draft before, we're assembling data from all over really all over the country, experts and other federal agencies, et cetera. Right? So the draft EIS will go, like Brad Hammond just said, late 2019. We'll see what the final draft looks like. Formally publish that in the Federal Register, ask for public comment. We will have to address any public comments. So that's like the latest. But it behooves you to get all your concerns in now. As the
So right
framework
now-
for the EIS is being written, the rough drafts of the chapters are being sketched right now. So the sooner you get your concerns in, the better it is
A
for
formal
both
letter
sides.
with the attachments with the spelled out concerns.
Yeah, that's the best one.
format.
That will go in the record, be part of the EIS.
Is there?
I mean, this is a good meeting. I'm happy we're here. We all came here because it's important, but this is not a formal meeting as far as the EIS goes.
Is there?
The federal government didn't call the meeting. We didn't advertise it. So I can't consider this a formal EIS meeting. This is meeting with Packard's Parish, hear your
Understand.
concerns, put it all in writing so we make sure we capture your concerns and we don't, we're not looking at me and Mark's handwritten scribbles here. Send us a formal
Is
letter.
there a formal appellation or heading or structure that you want it in, Colonel, or does it just have to clearly identify itself as being
Yeah,
an EIS?
just more
of sorts?
specific, the better. And, this is
Okay,
in reference to
understood. Yes,
the
sir.
proposed diversion of mid-Barataria and the EIS for that.
Yes, sir.
We'll know what that is. You
Yes, sir.
don't have to worry
Yes, sir.
about getting too specific in the titling and all
Right,
that,
no,
and
just
formatting.
to make
but
sure it goes to the right
specific
place.
in
it
your
goes to the right
concerns,
place. Yes, sir.
specific tie back to any academic papers and whatnot.
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you, Colonel, for, given what we articulated today, Colonel, is there any other thing that you need from Plaquemines Parish government, besides a formal letter with these attachments?
For us, no, I don't think so.
No, that's what we need to put in.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you all for your attendance. And we greatly look forward to continuing to get some of these scientific questions and other questions answered. So thank you all. Thank you for your attendance.